Hello there, my name is Dr. Saleem Javed. I am an associate professor at the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Lingyas Lalita Devi Institute of Management and Sciences, affiliated with Guru Gobind Singh Indraprastha University. We have been talking about how cinema started and how it has changed our lives. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about block booking, acquisition of theatres and other film industry. As you know that we have been talking about that how from East Coast New York the entire film industry relocated to the northwest of downtown Los Angeles, which we popularly known as Hollywood, in the time frame between 1908 to 1913, and the reasons were immense. I mean, there were financial reasons, there were social reasons, there were legal reasons, there were functional reasons, and one of the biggest reasons because of which people, all the creative people or the production houses or majority of the production houses migrated from East Coast to the Los Angeles, which is the northwest downtown of basically where the Hollywood was later on became popular, was MPPC. If you remember, we talked about MPPC in detail, and it had its headquarter in New York, and you know all what was happening, how MPPC you know took everybody, especially the independent producers and who were not part of the MPPC, how they were not given equipments, raw material, and how there was ironclad hand on them, how the suppression was happening. So Hollywood became a perfect heaven for all those people who were basically the victims of MPPC there in New York, because they had all the resources, all the patents of cameras, and maximum access to the raw material, and the independents were left with no choice but to look for safe havens, and Hollywood, which was basically downtown of Los Angeles, became one of their favorite spots. Now, why why, what was the major reason? Because there were a lot of summons issued by MPPC company to all those people who were not part of their group, and obviously they are racking crews, and all the hustle and bustle, the mechanism, the goon mechanism. So a lot of enterprises fled westward. It was I mean, obviously you can bear the brunt of financial crunch for some time, but if it is about your safety, security, and you don't see future, and there is more legal involved in it, then obviously you would like to change your place, and that is what exactly happened with a lot of independent producers. Now, why was moving to Hollywood a wise step in year between 1908 to 1913? Today, after 100 or 110 years, we can say yes, it was. But think of that time when people were not sure of that place, which is like exactly opposite of where it was. So, you know, first and the foremost priority of all the independent producers and all the independent producers, basically actors were hired, so it was not a problem. So producers prefer to go to a place where even if the production is less, there is no legal issue involved there. So that became one of the major reasons shifting from New York to Los Angeles, or suburb of that Hollywood. The area had more more to offer directors than just safety. you know um, Companies like Shelling has been going there from 1907. It became a trend from 1908 to 1930 to go to Hollywood. But a lot of independent producers by this time, they started moving actually from 1905, 1906, but that is sort of a date where no major or no known company moved to Hollywood. So Shellig was the first company in 1907 which moved to that particular to that particular place, and rest is the history. Now, the most important thing, that when you had so much of facilities, so much of company, so much of in fact everybody there in New York, then you move to a new place. Obviously, it had its own advantages, and one of the advantages was that they were free from any legal binding. They like it was from outside the jurisdiction of New York. So, as long as they were inside the jurisdiction of New York, yes, they were bound to follow the process. But as soon as they came out of that jurisdiction, so it became bit there was a sigh of relief, that now they can start their work again without any legal foundation. Now, once a lot of people started moving to Hollywood, so the very interesting fact here is that MPPC had a strong hold on New York. So, majority of the independents, producer, director, so whatever, so let us call them independents. So, majority of the independents moved to Hollywood. Now, the way we know Hollywood today is basically established by the independents. So, Hollywood was largely colonized, if I may say so, that Hollywood was largely colonized by independents by 1914. It was the independent companies that provided the funding for the studios that would establish Hollywood as the global cinematic hub for the subsequent 5 decades. Now, this again and again in my lectures, I have been indicating towards 1950s, late 1940s and the entire 1950s, and what was the shift that was happening late in 1950s, and how 1960 got its own characteristics, and in 1970s then you have the entry of Francis Ford Coppola. Now, so Carl Laemmle of Universal Picture, Adolph Zukor of Famous Player Company, Zess L. Lasky of the Feature Play Company, Samuel Goldfish, lately Goldwyn of the Goldwyn Picture Corporation, Louis B. Mayer of the Metro Picture Corporation, Louis J. Selznick of the Selznick Picture Company, William Fox of the Fox Film Corporation, and after the war, Harry, Abe, Sam and Jack Warner of Warner Brothers Picture Incorporated. Now, the majority of these individuals, one of the very interesting thing about these people, that majority of these individuals were little businessmen by the time they started, who speculated in the film industry during the chaotic initial decade of cinema. Now, this is really important, that unless until you do not have your hands dirty in the process while learning, you cannot make it a big, you cannot make it big. So, all these people that I have just talked about, most of them, rather the majority of these individuals were businessmen who speculated in the film industry during the chaotic initial decade of cinema, seeking to achieve rapid financial gain. Now, this is really important because later on they will become the producers, and one of the priorities of a producer, be that Hollywood, India or any regional industry, is seeking to achieve the rapid financial gain. Now, they transition from penny arcade showmen and Nickelodeon operator to film manufacturers, then to producers, distributors, and ultimately to Hollywood studio executives. Now, one of the problems that India is facing at this point of time, when you talk about studios, the studio executives are not trained this way. Now, look at what I have just said. They transition from penny arcade showman and Nickelodeon operator to film manufacturers. Look at the radical shift. Then to producers, absolutely 180 degree. Then distributor, I mean poles apart, and ultimately to Hollywood studio executives. Now, this entire journey from from a small theater owner to studio executive or to become owner of a studio, the problem that India is facing, that these are the titles on which people directly come and start working. They have not lived the journey. Producers, those who have gone through the journey, even in India and Hollywood, they know the business in and out, and doesn't matter what the trend is, they have always been consistent with the good film. Now, this is one of the biggest responsibilities of of producer side, that whosoever is working with them and whosoever is working with the studio, I have a lot of friends, and they always say that dealing with studio is far more difficult than making a film. Now, one of the closed door discussion is that majority of the people, those who are as studio executives, have only seen it as one of the businesses. They are not aware, or they have not gone through these transitions. They are not emotionally promoted from one stage to another stage, and there is where it becomes a script becomes a property there. So, what is the property? What is your invest? So, there is a investment on the property. Whereas a script or a screenplay is far beyond than a property. Nobody can value it unless you do not make it. So, you can weigh it, please understand, you can weigh it, how much will it cost, where the shift is, where is it going, what it's supposed to achieve, you can weigh it. But to evaluate it, it takes at least not more than, unless you have not made at least 20 films in a row, you do not know what script is saying. So, you at least you need to do this experiment 20 times before you become an executive, studio executive, and say that this film will work and this film will not work. So, let it be, but look at that beautiful transition from penny arcade showmen and Nickelodeon operators to film manufacturers, then to producers, then to distributors, and then ultimately to Hollywood studio executives. What a marvelous journey it has been for one single life. And they were absolutely, the people that I just talked about, they were absolutely unknown individuals, small businessmen, and they were there when the chaos was at its peak, and they were in a, they were looking for corners, they were cutting the corners from where they can achieve rapid financial gain. So, when I say that, I mean, there is an allegation when you talk about Hayes Code and a lot of other things that I will be discussing, late 40s, 50s and 60s, and how that there was a rebellious attitude in 70s, how there was an exploitative attitude in 60s, rebellious attitude in 80s, and that transformed to discovering new areas into filmmaking, where you have Steven Spielberg, James Cameron, then you have the taxi driver Martin Scorsese, before that you have Francis Ford Coppola, and before that you have Alfred Hitchcock, and and then before that you have Gone with the Wind, and a lot of other things. So all these things are because you really have to understand that studios, even they were experimenting. One person life, I mean, right now we are talking about somewhere 1910, 1920, 1930s, and transitioning from showman, Nickelodeon operator, to manufacturer, producer, distributors, and then studio executives. And it had its positive side also, which I will be discussing during the lecture. Now, consequently, processing not only conventional business acumen, but also extraordinary ambition and astute survival instinct. So, you really have to understand this, that how how the journey, took its shape. It was absolutely a survival instinct. Generally you and I say that in necessity is the mother of invention. So, for these businessmen to survive, they kept on changing, they kept on offering lot of options, things, permutation, combination, and this is how they survive. Now, these individuals that I have just talked about evolved into Mughals or moguls of a multi-million dollar enterprise and temporary stewards of 20th century's most impactful and culturally significant art form. Now, for the first time during this lecture that I have been talking about how when cinema started, it was the middle class was not its primary customer. Later on, when they started watching feature films from Italy and France, and when Hollywood itself started making multi-reelers, and obviously there was a staunch criticism, or rather MPPC did not allow it to happen, but eventually it happened. Now out of the survival instinct or the need, or the situation compelled all these people that I have just talked about to experiment with, and that experiment luckily uh, was it was producing profit, and they become the Mughals of a multi-million dollar enterprise, and they were the guardians of one of the newest one of the newest art forms, which has a cultural significance by that time, conditions that largely elucidated the peculiar amalgamation of carelessness, materialism, and vitality that has consistently defined Hollywood. Now, you really need to understand that it was the consistency, materialism, undoubtedly, because it is that I am investing this much and I supposed to get this much. So materialism is bound to be there, but at the same time they also tried, or somehow it became an art form in itself also. So the year 1914 was pivotal for the American film industry for many reasons. By this time, why 1914 is important? By 1914, majority of the independents moved from New York to Hollywood. There is no doubt about it. So 1940, 1914 becomes really important in many ways. One of the reasons, by this time the feature film had entirely surpassed the one and two reeler or shorts, which persisted solely in cartoon, newsreels, and serial installments. Now, this is really important to understand that whatever it was from 1895 to 1913, you have Quo Vadis in between, you have other films also, and whatever the reason, films from France, film from Italy, and people in America, Hollywood, it becomes a reality by 1913. American film audience was very happy with one reeler. All the early films that you have seen, The Gardener's Gardening, The Arrival of the Train, and four more films, they are one reeler. Early films were one reelers. Majority of the films made were one reelers. So what happens by 1913, thanks to Quo Vadis, um, and then the demand from the American audience itself, this one, by the end of 1913, this one reeler or two reeler. Two reeler was very recent, I mean 1911 and 1912 and 1913 development, but by the time 1913 gets over and by the time 1914 starts, you know, Hollywood in itself, the place Hollywood or the independents, now MPPC does not control them. So please understand that if I am saying 1914, it does not mean that on one single day, one reelers or two reelers, people stopped making them. No, it was not. Now by 1914, I mean that majority of the independents, they did away with one reeler or two reeler. Now, one reeler or two reeler were available. It is not that it was not, but it was for the cartoon format. Earlier Mickey Mouse shows, one reeler, two reeler. So it was for cartoon, it was for newsreel in itself, and for some serial installments. So it was there, but from film fraternity, by 1914, majority of the independents and the producers and the executives and the directors, they decided that we are not sticking to one reeler now, we are moving. Now one reeler or two reeler is a thing of the past. So where this one reeler, I mean MPPC started, continued making it, because they were, they were resisting the fact. So they kept on making it, but nobody was looking towards them anymore, because it has lost its cases, and then it lost this MPPC was, it became dysfunctional, because 1914, the First World War started. That is why it took some more time officially to declare that MPPC is a dysfunctional body. Had the First World War would not have taken place in 1914, chances are that the official documentation of MPPC dysfunctional would have been there by the year 1940, but it took the First World War bought some time for MPPC, and so officially it was somewhere 1916 and 1917, but nobody anyway, because majority of the independents shifted to Hollywood, so nobody was bothered about MPPC at all, and this one reeler culture, it went off like a fag. So this evolution coincided with a widespread economic boom triggered by the onset of war in Europe. Now, luckily for American population, they were not the part of the First World War. They were not part of the First World War. And the entire world, if America on this side of the continent, then major European nations of this side, including, and we were not directly involved, but because we were colonized, so we were also concerned. So America was not involved in the First World War, and they were like onset of, they were, during this time 1914 onwards, it was an economic boom for them. Now, economic boom is like fine, it is absolutely fine for Americans, but at the same time Italy, France that I was talking about, Quo Vadis and lot of other French films, filmed the art, film the art movement was somewhere starting in 1914 only, 1913 by the way. So it was a fine economic boom time for them, fine, but rest of the Europe was involved in the war. Now, like suppose if these are the two parties and one says that I am doing fine, so they are like moving like this, but this industry, which is European industry, because of the war it went down like this. So now if earlier there was a difference of this much, now there was a difference of this much, and they were smart enough to pick the opportunity. They were smart enough to pick the opportunity. Profit surged, accompanied by rising cost, as the industry experienced fast expansion in multiple directions, creating and disseminating fortunes in the process. I'll be talking about it